Why do people stay in relationships for years without a clear direction? I think a lot of people stay in relationships for a long time without a clear direction because I often think that a lot of times we don't plan. I know that planning is something that I personally have had to implement into my own life. And I think we're scared of planning. Planning can seem intimidating or difficult. But I think the nice thing about planning is that planning helps both parties understand the direction, the goals, you know, what we're working towards. And I think what happens for a lot of people is that when we start dating, we just focus on, do we like the person instead of kind of coming to the table and saying, hey, what are you looking for? What am I looking for? Okay, great. Is this what we want? Perfect. Let's make a plan. And how do we execute this? Or how do we get ourselves, you know, to that goal? And I think that's something that's so important. But a lot of times we kind of focus on a lot of those other aspects and elements of the relationship, but really forget to work on the planning. So if you don't have a plan, or if you're in a relationship and you're looking to plan or you don't have a plan, talk to your partner, take some time and really focus on planning. At what point does seeing where it goes become fair of commitment? I've heard that a lot. I think when you talk to your friends or you talk to people that are starting off a relationship, often people will say, "Yeah, I'm just seeing where it goes. I want to see, where things go." And what I've noticed is that I see that a lot with people who are coming out of situations where they've been hurt, where someone's done them wrong, or they feel like, commitment isn't necessarily something that's hard for them, but maybe they're scared of hearing what the other person feels about that commitment, or maybe they have concerns that they like the person, but that person might not like them. So by kind of saying, we'll see where it goes, it takes that pain or that responsibility off both parties of feeling like, hey, we need to actually have a conversation or have, some kind of concrete plan here to actually say, hey, this is what it is, or, you know, this is my expectation. These are your expectations. And I often think we're scared of expectations. And I don't know why, because I think if you're in a healthy relationship and you're with somebody that you care about and they care about you both should kind of know what you want or what you're looking for. And it shouldn't be this kind of guessing game, or I guess a better way to say it is just this, Russian roulette of just, let's just see where it goes and hope for the best. People find themselves in these cycles where they're going on the same date, they're dating people, and it's that same thing over and over again. And I think that's because rather than them having the intent or coming to the table with that intention and demanding that intention also from the other person, we often just settle for less. And I don't think settling for less is good, especially when it comes to our heart, our love, our relationships, and our feelings. Question number 3: is 1 year enough time to know if you want to marry somebody? I think when it comes to relationships, I think there's no right or wrong answer in terms of time, but I would genuinely say that I think that you should give yourself some time to investigate and to get to know the person. I don't think there's anything bad with having those intentions, wanting to get married, but I think it's also important to do your research and to have other people vet. I think something that, I think anyone can benefit from before they get married or get into a long-term relationship is to take some time to really look at yourself and to find out things about yourself. I think when I hear people talk about dating, they usually talk about it from the reverse, which is they want to date the person to see if the other person is good enough for them. But often I think the thing that we don't work on is preparing ourselves to be the right person to be in that relationship or to be in that situation, because you can also meet a great person, but you yourself may not be ready. And I remember moments even in my life where, I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be that person that, is a husband or a boyfriend or whatever it was, but I didn't do the work. I didn't put in that time to prepare myself and to get ready for that relationship, get ready for that marriage. And I think that when people are looking to be together or to be in a long-term relationship, I think you have to put in that work. You have to put in that time to look at, okay, who am I? What are some of the things I need to work on? What are some of the things I need to heal from? And I think the healing piece is important because I think sometimes, if we're super independent or, you've been doing a lot of things on your own, you've been, independent, you've been the man and woman of the house, and then you bring a man into the mix. And sometimes that's hard to let go of that masculine side and to step into your femininity and say, okay, am I actually ready to be led? Well, yeah, I love this idea of having a man, but it's a completely different thing to actually step into that role as, if you're a man to be that provider. And when I say provider, also spiritually, also to be protector, to take your wife not just as, this person who's going to do everything for you, but also to look at, hey, how am I going to pour into her? Do I have the emotional agility or the control or self-respect, discipline, the consistency, all those things that often I feel like we don't work on. And I think that you see that a lot with men who have a strong relationship with God. I think men who often believe in God have a good foundation to build towards marriage. And I always encourage people that if you are looking to marry somebody, marry somebody who does have faith or does believe in God, because I think you're gonna go through things no matter what relationship, person, you go through. But I think when you have that core foundation of you and your partner both believe in God, there's this accountability that goes beyond just your feelings or her feelings. And you both can come to God and say, you know what, God, show me where I'm missing this. Show me where I'm, not doing this or not doing that. And I think to tie it back into the original question, is 1 year enough? I think if you've been doing the work for a long time, you might not need a year. But I think if you're starting from scratch and you're just starting from, no foundation, no work, no self work, I think you should take at least a year. I think you should take that time, not necessarily to focus on them and your relationship with them, but to focus on yourself and to look at, what areas of my life can I improve on? What areas of my life do I need to work on to be a better person in, that future relationship? It should be looked at it as a gift because you're preparing yourself for a blessing. And I think the year or whatever time you take to prepare yourself for that relationship is important as well, because I think a lot of times, especially in this culture, sex and dating, everything's happening so fast. So people are sleeping with people on the first, second, third date. And I think the moment you bring sex into a relationship, it changes everything. I think our senses, our judgment, everything is biased now because we've attached so much of our understanding and that person's identity to this sexual arousal, this feeling that they provide for us, that we don't always necessarily look at a lot of the red flags. I think a lot of times those red flags that we complain about with people, they're always there. It's just, do you want to see, those red flags in people? I think people often will say, oh, I got manipulated, or, you know, he was gaslighting me. But I think a lot of times the signs are always there and the negative things about people are always there. It's just, do you want to see it? I think when sex is involved or when, we become infatuated or we we like people, it's often hard not to, see those things or to see that person or to think about that person in that way. So, yeah, I think ultimately just take that time and, work on yourself. Number 4, what are people actually afraid of losing by committing? I think commitment is scary to people because I think for men, I think commitment, there's a fear of loss of money, of an investment that goes wrong. I can think of, maybe this is a bad example, but I think of this idea of maybe you sign up for an MLM or some kind of Ponzi scheme, $5,000 worth of Avon, and they just have it sitting in their garage and they're never going to sell it or move it. And I think it's the same thing for a relationship. I think when you've invested your time, your money, your effort, your love, you've brought this person to meet your friends and family, and maybe they embarrass you, maybe they cheat, maybe they quit, they leave. I think there's a fear that people will ridicule you or judge you or make fun of you. And on the other side, I often feel like even though people can say that they're loyal or we trust them, I think that the reality of human beings is that everyone's going to fail you. No one's perfect. People are going to hurt you no matter what relationship, no matter what you're in. Everyone has flaws in some way. And I think the fear with commitment is I don't think anybody wants to get hurt, but I think love is pain. And I think love isn't conditional. It's not. I think love is about working through those hard moments, going through those dark seasons, going through those moments where, you know, maybe he's broke, maybe she's sad, maybe she's depressed, maybe you guys take a break. There's going to be these storms, but it's like, can I trust this person to go through those storms with me? And I don't think that there's a lot of people out there that are willing to go through those storms or those difficult moments. I think anytime that people go through hardships, a lot of times people betray you or they leave you or they go to something easier. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest, deterrents for commitment, which is I don't think that a lot of people trust their partners or trust people to be willing to go through things and to love them the way that they love. And again, I think that foundation goes back to finding people that have that good foundation or that rock, which is, a faith-based belief or something, around God where it's you understand that life is bigger than you. Life is bigger than a circumstance. One moment won't define you forever. So you really just have to work through that. And you both have to have those fruits of spirit, which is that compassion, that love, that grace, and understand that just as we go on our knees and we pray and we ask God for forgiveness of our sins, it's like you also have to do that for your partner. You also have to understand that you may love somebody, but they're going to go through moments where they're not going to be them best selves. They may not see a lot of their flaws or their errors, and you have to kind of change that. You have to be this person to, work through that or be patient or wait for them to change. Who benefits from more long, undefined dating, men or women? I think I see a lot of men benefit from like these, what would I call it? Inconspicuous dating or situationships. I think that's more what we would call it today. I think that the reason for that is because I think commitment isn't necessarily a male thing. It's not just for men. I think women also have to commit. But I think that commitment is something that benefits a woman more because I think commitment is a protection for women from a lot of things. Because I think, if you're just a girlfriend or you're just like a situationship, there's always this defense or there's this ability to kind of deflect a lot of bad behavior or negativity to kind of take you off your throne. Because if you're not a queen, I don't have to give you that kind of queen treatment. If you're not a wife, I don't have to treat you like a wife. I can treat you, maybe like a side piece or a friend or an acquaintance where I don't have to make that commitment. I don't have to love you. I want to be with you. I think it takes a lot out of a man to even make that initial commitment that if he makes that commitment and he does a lot of the work, meeting your family, getting to know your friends, creating a plan with you to marry you and be with you, I often think that that's a lot of work for somebody to do just to kind of, maybe get in your pants or use you or abuse you. And not to say there's not, people out here that are doing that kind of stuff. There is 100%. But I think for the most part, a big way to filter out who's right for you and who's not right for you are the people that aren't willing to do a lot of those big steps or do a lot of that work at the beginning. because if they're not willing to do that work at the beginning, then it's a clear indication for the most part that they're probably just looking to get something and go. This is a temporary situation. But I think for women, I think there's something more invasive about sharing your body with someone or a stranger and having people just kind of use you like an object. I think for men, I think it's the same thing. I think we exhibit those traits differently, but I just think for women, it's a little bit more invasive to be intimate and have a relationship with someone and then, for that person just to move on. But I think that on the flip side, I think there's something so beautiful and important for men and women to find someone that they love and to be with somebody they love and not have to feel like they're giving somebody, treatments that maybe they don't deserve or they haven't earned. And I see that a lot. I see a lot of women, cooking dinner, buying gifts, doing a lot of things that a wife or, you know, no, things that a wife would do, but they're not a wife. They're not married. They don't have a ring or they don't have a marriage certificate. So you're doing all these things. You're acting like a wife. You're sleeping with the guy. You're changing so much things of your life. But at the end of the day, you don't have any of the benefits or the comfort or even the security that a wife does. And, I think for women, there's a big loss there where maybe you spend 4 or 5 years in a situationship when, that guy's taking up space for somebody else that could come into your life and actually do something good. I think for women, they lose out a lot more because I think especially as they get older and you're going back into the dating world, I think the dating world for women is a lot more unforgiving. I think when you're younger as a woman, I think there's a big emphasis put on beauty versus looking at just who she is as a person or a personality. I think when we're younger, obviously we're fit, we're outgoing, we're more open-minded. And I think as we get older, we get more set in our ways. We know what we like. We're not really trying to change things up or be different. And so I think that's hard when you're looking to start a relationship with someone because now you have this really rigid structure. And if you wasted a lot of your good years or those early years with people who didn't appreciate you or people who weren't adding value to your life, I often find that now when you finally do find that person or find that man that wants to come in and love you and treat you right, sometimes, we're so jaded because of how we were treated in the past that we can't even now accept that good love when it finally comes. So I think that's why it's really important to, maintain your peace and just keep your distance from people unless they show you that they have good intentions. All right. If marriage isn't the goal, what exactly is the relationship building towards? I'm curious. I always see this like I see people that are dating for like 5, 10 years, and I'm just always sitting there thinking like, okay, what is the goal? What's the purpose of this? Because to me, especially after like your mid to late 20s, I think at some point you have to start to kind of say to myself, okay, what am I looking for? Why am I dating people? And I think if you're dating people and your goal really isn't marriage, then I'm confused about why you're dating because I think dating is often used for those purposes. People are lonely and they just want to talk, and some people want that physical validation through sex, so they use dating to kind of get that. And I think the problem with that is that companionship and sex are two very important things, and they're beautiful things, but they're also very sacred things. And I think when we're talking again about a marriage or a relationship, I think I don't think that there's anything more intimate than sharing your body with another person. All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about some hard questions about love, about relationships. So, question number one, what does marriage actually mean to you? I think when you're getting married or you're in a relationship, I think some of the hard questions that you should ask from the beginning is, what does marriage actually mean to you? And I think that's important because I think for a lot of people, marriage can mean different things. I think for a lot of people, marriage is a fairy tale. It's like this nice, warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart where you're just like, oh my gosh, like, I hope the person makes me feel so good and makes me feel loved. And often I think that's not what love is. That's not what marriage is. I think marriage is more duty than it's just feelings. I think a lot of people, it's just feelings make me feel good. This relationship's going to make me happy. Whereas I think marriage is actually like duty and responsibility. And the reason I say that is because there's going to be moments where maybe you don't feel like you love the person, or you don't like what they're doing, or you don't like who they've become. But the responsibility and the duty that you have as a husband and as a wife, it doesn't change. And so that's where I think it's important to have that conversation, because if you're going in with this fairy tale and, he's going in with this, I'm just going to do whatever I got to do, even through these hard moments, then again, we have these different expectations. And then we're wondering why, a year into the relationship, why maybe it's not working out. Question number 2, how do you handle conflict when you're wrong? Now, this is a big one. I'll admit, I think handling conflict when you're wrong is hard because, let's face it, nobody wants to be wrong. No one wants to also accept fault or take responsibility for things, especially when people are going to say things and tell you things about yourself that maybe are 100% true, but it just doesn't feel good. And I think why this is important is because if you're going to be with somebody, I think their ability to take accountability for their actions is really important, because I think that if you're in a relationship with someone, they can't take accountability for their bad behaviors or their negativity, then it's going to be a really hard relationship. And I think that when people have unhealthy mechanisms of forcing themselves to, not take accountability or blame others, that causes arguments. I think finding people that are willing to take accountability and own up or be transparent and tell the truth, I think that's so important. That's going to really make or break, your relationship. What did your parents' relationship teach you about love? I think our parents are a good indication of who we are. I always say your children are a reflection of who you are. So I think that, if you grew up in a broken home, or you grew up in a situation where you didn't see love, you didn't see romance, you didn't see a lot of these things that sometimes you're expecting from your partner, sometimes in the back of my mind, I think, okay, well, if I never saw that, maybe I don't know how to be that for somebody. And that's something that I need to work on. That's something I need to learn to do and to be. My dad didn't love my mom this way, or maybe my mom didn't treat my father this way. And so I need to make sure that, I'm romantic with my partner, or I'm caring, or I'm understanding, or I put their needs first. And I think usually when you look at your parents, it's a really good place to kind of see where you can improve, and also where you can take some of those things where maybe your parents were really good at certain parts of their marriage and their relationship. Maybe my parents always prayed together, or they spent time with each other and walked, and, they always made time for each other at the end of the hectic day. And so those are the elements where you want to incorporate that into your relationship. And then on the other side, also look at the things where, okay, maybe they weren't so good at that, and then try and work on those things. What patterns do you repeat in relationships? I think things that you're going to see in a relationship a lot are things that you don't take accountability for. So I think often what I've noticed is that when you're blaming other people, you start to forget that you also need to do self work, because if you get with people, that quote unquote keep manipulating you or gaslighting you, I think at some point you have to start taking accountability for the fact of saying, okay, what is it about me that attracts that kind of person or attracts these kind of individuals? Because I think it's one thing to say, okay, if it happens once, but sometimes people are in relationships where they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 relationships deep, and you're dating the same person. You're with, the same type of guy or same type of girl. And I think what you have to start to do is you have to start to look at yourself and take accountability and kind of say, okay, well, what is it that I don't want to see about myself that is getting me into this situation? Or what are some of the things that I could have changed or done differently so that I don't repeat that same outcome? So if you're getting ghosted, if the relationship ends, you know, before there's a serious commitment, sometimes it's saying, okay, let me have that conversation at the beginning instead of waiting so long to put my expectations down. And so those are some small things where I think you can look at yourself and look at your behavior and kind of say, okay, what can I change and what can I do differently? So, those are really important. And what's question number 15?
What would make you walk away from a relationship?
Okay, things that I think would make people want to walk away from a relationship are, I think when people give up on themselves. I think by giving up on yourself and not allowing God to actually have sovereignty in your life, I think that's a big reason. I think when people lose this idea of having a grounded sense of who they are and what they want to be, I think that's a reason I would walk away because I think if people don't know what their purpose is or who they are, I don't know how you help someone through that, or I don't know what someone can do to change that or to be better if they don't know who they are. And I think that it's really important for people to know who they are. And when your partner loses a sense of that and they don't have something to go back to, then I don't really see a future for you guys in terms of being able to actually build something now and, you know, grow in that relationship. In the beginning of my dating life, I think I would have said that people don't change. But I think now, looking at myself and looking at other people, that sometimes I think people will change. I think people just change not within the time frame that you want them to change. And I think that's where a lot of us struggle, which is a lot of us want people to change and to become people that we want them to be instead of looking at, okay, how is this person progressing within the means of their own life and who they are and what they've accomplished. So I think people do change. It also depends on the environment that they find themselves in, because if you're in the wrong environment, sometimes it's hard for you to change. Sometimes you keep a lot of those old habits or those bad habits and you don't move forward. So I think when you're in a relationship, it's really important to cultivate a good environment for growth and a good environment for positivity and good things to be born and to be nurtured.
How do you handle money, stress, and responsibility?
Money, stress, and responsibility. I think money is a really important thing because I think when I've talked to a lot of older people, I think I've seen a lot of relationships, growing up where people got divorced or people broke up because of money. So I think from the beginning, you need to talk about money. I think if money is something important to you as a person, you can't go into a relationship with a person that doesn't also share that sentiment. You need to find someone who, also believes that money is important. And then I think for stress, you also have to talk about what things are stress relieving, what things you do to kind of help yourself with that stress and with those hardships. And then the third one, which was what?
Responsibility.
Responsibility. I think responsibility is one that will change and it will change as you grow because I think some things you'll get into a routine, you'll build habits, you'll start to do them. Whereas some things, I think if you don't have good systems, I think systems are really important for your household, for your life. I think having good systems helps with responsibility because if everyone knows what their role is and everyone knows what they need to do, then it just makes things a lot easier for everybody. Dating for companionship versus legacy, I guess that's a hard one because hmm, I'm really trying to think about, you know, legacy. I guess legacy is what you leave behind. So I don't think that people would date just to leave something behind. I mean, I think people just, have kids and build a legacy, and maybe that happens through dating. But I think dating should start by, I think if you can't be friends with the person that you want to be with, it's going to be really hard to be married to them because I think friendship is the other side of intimacy because I think intimacy is not just sex. I think friendship is the other side where it's like we learn to talk, we learn to care about each other, we learn to really be a part of each other's lives in an intimate way. And I think sometimes in dating, we don't value that aspect of companionship. We just think of maybe the physical side, but I think friendship is actually a really positive thing to have in a meaningful relationship. So I would say companionship.
What are you unwilling to compromise?
Unwilling to compromise. I think everyone should have like a foundation of things that they're not going to compromise on. So I think your beliefs, I think your morals, I think, you can compromise on some things in your relationship. But I think if you're a person who, you know, you believe in God or you don't believe in murder, stealing, or different things, I don't think that you should compromise that for your relationship. And so I think everyone, again, needs to have these boundaries or have an idea of who they are and what they want to accomplish. And if you don't know who you are or what it is that you want to accomplish, then I think you're going to be in a bad place. When you start compromising on things that are important to you, whether that's, your beliefs, your morals, your security, your peace, your finances, sometimes they can put you in a bad place. And so I think you have to be very smart and you have to be very intelligent and you have to look out for what's best for you and for your partner. So I think sometimes compromise can be an enemy, not just to yourself, but also to your relationship and your partner.
How do you behave when you stop trying?
I think when people stop trying a relationship, I think it looks different for everybody, but I think some of the signs are the same. I think people stop trying with like their looks. I think people will not, get their hair done, shave their legs, paint their nails. It can also look like lack of communication. Maybe it's not doing the small things. So I think making breakfast or going for a morning run, sending a text message in the morning before you go to work. I think that lack of effort is usually the biggest sign. So if people stop showing interest in you, they don't care about you anymore, they stop putting in that work, that's usually a sign of, okay, this person doesn't care or this person doesn't, you know, want to be with me. When you see a drastic change, not just, maybe for a day or two, but I think when you see an extended period of time where someone's not putting in that effort and not doing that work, then yeah, maybe it's time to reevaluate that situation.
Why do people lie at the beginning instead of becoming better versions of themselves?
That's a good one. I think people lie in the beginning because I think sometimes telling the truth is scarier than telling someone who you actually are. So I think in the beginning, we often lie because sometimes having someone know who we really are is scary. And I think that people would rather create a facade of who they are and create an image that they know is likable or that they think you're going to like. So then that way you'll trust them, you'll like them, you'll see value in them. And then the hope is, okay, if the person's willing to give me a chance, maybe they'll still love me. And I think that that's wrong because I think often what you do by doing that is you're going to lose the person's trust. And I think trust is so important. It's more valuable to be in a relationship with a person who trusts you than to be in a relationship where you're constantly trying to regain that trust or rebuild it with a person. I think if you start with that foundation of having that trust and you and that person can connect, then that's a really positive thing from the beginning.
Is catfishing insecurity or manipulation?
Catfishing. I think catfishing falls more on the manipulation side than an insecurity because I think insecurities are things that we can hide, but I think being something completely different than who you actually are, because I think if you're going to build a relationship with someone and they think that you're a completely different person or live somewhere else or you work somewhere else or you're their friend but you're pretending to be this person that they've met online. I think that's really sick and twisted. And I also think in an era of AI where people are, changing their image to look like a model or somebody that they're not. And then, you meet these people in person and you're like, whoa, like, you don't look anything like yourself or, your pictures. And now it's even video, people are sending videos to people and kind of being like, oh, like, here's a video of me or FaceTime me. So there's a lot of technology now where people are going to extreme lengths to really hide who they are and what they look like. And I think that's evil because I think regardless of if you don't look good or you have insecurities about how you look or who you are, I think you should always give the person the choice to make that decision for themselves, even if that decision, may hurt your feelings or not make you feel good.
If someone lies early, can you ever trust them?
I think it depends on what people lie about. I mean, I think everyone lies. I think the reality of life is, we all lie in some way. Everyone tells white lies. But I think it's, is the person willing to take accountability for those lies? And do they understand the impact of that lie and why they're lying? And then on the other side, is it a lie that they've told once and then they're stopped? Or is it something where it's becoming a habit? So, you know, if you don't like smoking and I tell the person, don't smoke, and it's okay, I'm never gonna smoke ever again, and I catch them smoking, the next day, would I never trust them again? But then if I see you every single day, I catch you doing it eventually, I think it would be fair to kind of say, I don't trust you. I can't take your word at face value because you're going to say one thing to me and then the other side, you're going to do something that hurts my feelings. So I think trust is something very sacred and important. And I think you should do your best and do everything in your best interest to preserve it because I think when you lose that trust with people, it's really hard to build it back. I don't think it's impossible, but I think that it's just easier if you just maintain it than to lose it and try to get it back.
Is ghosting emotional immaturity or self protection?
Ghosting. Ghosting's such an interesting one because I think that at first I didn't really understand the concept of ghosting. Like I used to think, okay, why do people, why are people ghosting? Why are people, you know, doing that to like why would you do that to somebody? But I think ghosting sometimes, at least for myself, I can think of some instances where I've ghosted people. I think I've been in situations where I've had those talks with someone and I feel like we're so misaligned. But I think the problem is with dating is that you often get entangled with people first before you know what their intentions are. And then that makes it really awkward because you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing with people before you really know them. And then now you want to come back to the table and tell the person, okay, well, I'm not interested or I don't want to be with you. But then it's like, okay, well, why did you take me on these dates? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Right. So you seem like a hypocrite. And I'd like to believe that telling people the truth is better, and I think you should have that conversation in real life and tell them the truth. But at the same time, I don't know what would actually make people feel better. I mean, personally, I think I would like to believe that if a person told me to my face and told me the truth, it would make me feel better. But at the same time, I think if the person didn't give me that courtesy or they didn't do that to me, I think I would be hurt for a little bit. But I think I would never maybe carry the burden of knowing, okay, I wasn't good enough. So I think that's a tough one. But I think ghosting is definitely a sign of immaturity because I think you should be able to have that conversation, talk to the person face to face and just tell them what you think and what you feel. And you should just have that conversation instead of running away from, that tough conversation.
Why is it easier to disappear than have a hard conversation?
I think disappearing is easier than having the tough conversation because I think when you're always running away from your problems, from your relationships, from your responsibility, from accountability, you never have to face those hard emotions or you don't have to feel like you're a failure. And I think a lot of times people are so selfish that I think we care more about how we're going to feel in the situation more than how the other person feels. And I think that when you disappear, you don't have to deal with any of the negative things around that conversation because I think the hardest thing to do with people is to answer the question of why. And that's hard because I don't think I think especially when you care about people, you like them, it's not always easy to tell someone that they're not good enough for you or you don't like them or they're not your cup of tea. And I know people all say, oh, you should just be transparent, you should just tell people. But I think staring someone in the face and telling them that they're not, good enough or not what you like is hard. And I don't think that everyone's built for that. I don't think everybody has the strength or the decency to do that. So in a weird way, I think that people sometimes think they're also being nice to people by not saying it because then they don't hurt their feelings. But I think in the long run, we owe it to people just to tell them the truth.
What does ghosting say about how we value people?
I think ghosting, I think the underlying issue within ghosting isn't the disappearing itself, but I think it's the fact that we don't value relationships enough that people just constantly ghost people. Like you see people who get ghosted all the time and so we're getting into this cycle where people are constantly going on dates and they're with people and they're getting ghosted, but like their friends or family, no one's saying to them, hey, people are ghosting you because XYZ. I think what we're doing to people is we're robbing them of the opportunity of growth and the ability to actually improve or to work on those things because if you never know what your issues are because no one ever tells you and you always get ghosted, then you can't improve on it. And I think, yes, maybe that conversation may be really uncomfortable one or two times. But I think when you've had enough of those conversations, hopefully in an ideal world, you'll walk away from them with some things to work on and some things to look at yourself and say, okay, how could I be better this way or change this or do this differently? And in the end, I think it might actually help a lot of people find the right person for them. But I think when they're not given that opportunity to grow and to be different, then, we're robbing them of that.
Is the real issue body count or lack of accountability?
Hmm. I think body count versus accountability is hard because I think we see this duality where I think sex is obviously something that we talk about a lot more than before. We see it on TV, apps, video games, it's in everything. And I think depending on your culture and your background, I think men have been championed to be, I think a lot of your bravado comes from your ability to woo a woman. And, the more women you have, the better or more manly you are. Whereas I think when we're talking about, relationships and love, I think that that's not a good metric of whether you're a real man or if you're not. And I think the same thing for women. I think we've also taken that taboo off of women of kind of saying, if a woman wants to sleep around, it's not negative. But at the same time, we haven't prepared women for some of the aftermath of multiple relationships and the effects of people using you. As often as we talk about sex as like a one way, thing, it's like, well, if it's what I want, who cares? I think what we don't do is look at the long term, which is this may be a decision that's good for you now, but then, when you want to share that intimacy now with the person that you do love. But when I think of it, I think of also like the fact that sex is not supposed to be something where it's like you're comparing it to other people or, there's like this is the good way and this is the bad way. If you find the right person and the right person finds you and you guys only share those things with each other, there's no need to compare or to wonder if this is wrong or if this is right or this is better. I think that the accountability piece is the fact that I think sex, when you have it with your partner or the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, is such a different thing than when you're sharing with a one night stand or a person that you may never see again. And I think that's important because when you give that sex or that intimacy away and that person doesn't value it, I think in some ways that damages us and that person takes. And so now, when you do get into that relationship and you do find yourself in those moments of wanting to share that intimacy, I think often people will feel that regret or feel that kind of feeling of, I wish I hadn't have done all those things so that this moment would have been special for this person because this person sees me, they love me, they make me feel something that yes, even though I've had, ex partners or ex people, they never made me feel the way that this person makes me feel. And so I think body count isn't necessarily important and it won't stop people from, sharing intimacy and finding the right person. But I think there is a lot of value in restraint and also not just, racking up the amount of partners that you have and also saying, I'm going to wait for that special person to come. I'm going to wait for that, woman or that man to come into your life and then, make sure that, you share those moments with the right people.
Can someone outgrow their past or do patterns always service?
I think that people can outgrow their past, but the caveat being, I think that those patterns often will reemerge, not always in the same way, but they'll always kind of be this lingering thing of because you've had a past, people may not trust you for it. Or you may find yourself in situations where you feel tempted to repeat those patterns. I've always said if there's things that you have an issue with or you have an addiction with or you have problems with, don't put yourself in a situation where those things can overpower you or maybe you have to make a hard decision. I think it's always easier if you put yourself in situations where you don't have to make hard decisions, but I think at the end of the day, people relapse, people go back, people make mistakes. But I think if you're conscious and you're honest and you're transparent with it, I think with a lot of work and patience and prayer and you just change your life, I think that there's nothing in life that we can't overcome and we can't grow from. But I think you need to do a lot of work depending on what it is to really help yourself get over it and create strategies and create a circle of people that also support you in that journey to, be better and to change from those things.
Why do we shame people instead of asking why they became that
That's a really good question. I think we shame people before we ask questions because I think that's what we've learned. I think judgment usually comes before questions. I think we'll see something and we'll judge it. And I remember reading this Hebrew rule where they're talking about how you should always hear all the sides of a story before you come to a conclusion about something. And I think about life and I think about how many times where people have made decisions or they've thought things or, they've judged people, but they didn't know, what the situation was or what everybody's side of the story. They heard one side of the story and they've made, a judgment. And I think we do that a lot because I think we see patterns, and so we just assume if you did this, and that obviously means you're this kind of person. And sometimes I think people go through seasons of their life where maybe they were doing things because that's how they were coping, or maybe they were doing things because that's how they were getting by, but that's not who they actually are, and that's not who they are now, and they found new ways to be different. So I think the reason that we usually shame people before we understand is because we're not often looking to heal. We're not looking to help people. I think people that love you and people that are looking to help you will ask you why you do something before they'll just judge you for it. And I think if you want to know who loves you, you're going to notice that the people that love you are going to ask you about why you did things that are wrong or did things that, aren't becoming of yourself versus just simply shaming you. But in the same way, I think it's different to judge people, to help them and to encourage them and to help them keep their life on track versus condemning people, but also not participating in that redemption phase or that restorative process of saying, hey, you did this, this is wrong, but how do we get you back to who you actually are? And I think sometimes we just focus on the mistakes, but we don't want to look at the fact that people aren't their mistakes. People can change and people can grow.
Do men want purity or control?
I think that, based on what I hear a lot, I think men want purity. I think it's controversial. I think that's hard because I think you have men who've slept around and, they've given themselves away and they're not, pure, but they have that expectation of their partner. And on the other side, I think there's men who, maybe don't look for that purity, but look for that control. And they feel like they're in a good relationship when they can control their woman or control the situation or control, everything she does because they see that control as safety. They see it as comfort because like, well, if I can control it, I can make it what I want it to be, and I think for both of those things, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting purity in your partner. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to, control certain aspects of your partner's life. But I think it's always fruitful to give people the choice. I think I wouldn't want to be controlled. I wouldn't want someone to make every decision for me. I think that when people love us and they care about us, they'll do things with a willing heart. And so we won't have to control people who love us because people who love us will do those things for us. So I think that people who want that purity and that control, I think for the people who want purity, just make sure that you're also purifying yourself and bringing the best version of yourself to the relationship. And then I think for the control people is taking some time to work on maybe your own insecurities and kind of see where you need to trust in your partner more and also say, control doesn't necessarily mean, better. Control isn't necessarily a good thing in situations because I think control can often lead to resentment and, you don't want to control someone. You want people to have free will and to choose to love you. I think making the choice to love someone is so much more powerful than, forcing them to.
How many people are trying to build but they've never seen?
I think a lot of people are trying to build things they've never seen. I think, you know, there's people that come from one parent households where they never saw their mom with a man and never saw their dad with a wife. And so a lot of times people are trying to fit in a mold they've never seen. A lot of people are trying to become a person they've never known. And so I think there's an onus for young parents and young couples and communities in general just to really prop up and big up and push into the light couples and people that are doing the right thing, people that are, loving their wives, women that are loving their husbands and showing people these examples so then that way people don't necessarily feel like, it's impossible to be these people or they can't be these people. I think everything's a choice. And so I think you have to make the choice to become a person. So I think that with that mindset, I think if you make that choice and you do the work, I think not only is it beneficial to you and to your partner, but also for that next generation of people, you're being a pioneer and you're trailblazing for, more things to come.
If your parents had a toxic relationship, how does that show up in your dating?
I think people that come from toxic, you know, home environments, often you see that like anger, rage, lack of communication, they shut down, substance abuse. I think what a lot of people don't understand about relationships is relationships don't just affect you, they also affect the other people in your life. So whether it's your friends, your mom, your dad, it can affect a lot of people around you. It affects your mindset, your beliefs, your attitude. And so I think what's really important is if you come from a place where it's toxic, heal, do the work, and make sure that you don't take out that negativity or that anger or that frustration onto your partner or that person that you're in a relationship with because they're not the person that put you in that. They're not the person that hurt you in those ways. And sometimes I think that toxic nature can shift from, those situations into your relationship. Next question is we're talking about marriage. So we're talking about if we're dating, but the purpose of our dating is in marriage, then what are we dating for? I think what I see a lot with people is people are dating for 4, 5, 6 years and the relationship isn't going anywhere. And I think there's often people who want companionship and there's people who want sex. And I think those two things are very different. And I think dating often gets used as a Trojan horse where people will say, okay, we're dating. So that's why I'm going to sleep with you. And I think marriage is about family. Marriage is about building together, growing, establishing something together. And I think sex and companionship are such a beautiful thing when you have that within the confines of a marriage. And there's a parable where, in the Bible where it talks about sex being a fire. And fire is a great thing when it's in a furnace because it keeps the whole house hot. But when that fire leaves the furnace and it starts to go on the furniture and the walls and different things, it's not that great. And I think in the same way, when we're dating and the end goal isn't marriage, I think that's when our feelings get hurt. That's when we feel betrayed, or that's when we feel like we've wasted a lot of our time because we're building and we're putting in this energy, we're putting in this intimacy, we're putting in a lot of things, but the end result or the end goal is not necessarily, love or a marriage or children. And I mean, that's understandable. The next question that we have is about emotional compatibility versus emotional comfort. And I think when we're talking about this idea of emotional comfort versus compatibility, I think we have to look at how we are as people. And I think as people, what makes us feel good is usually not the thing that we need to do. And usually the things that we don't want to do are usually the things that we need to do. And I think that compatibility, especially in the modern world, I think the things that we think that make us compatible with others are usually the fact that, we like the same music, we hang out with the same people, we do the same things. Where I think there's a lot of benefit to being with people that are sometimes not like you and don't like the things that you like. And I think of that as, for example, if you're a person who likes to drink and go out and party and you meet someone who doesn't, a lot of times people say, oh, well, you know, you should find someone who drinks and parties too. At some point in my life, hopefully, I'm going to want to change. I'm going to want to be different. I'm going to want to have kids. I'm going to want to grow up and focus on my career, focus on my health. And if I'm in a relationship with a person who also likes to do those things that I do, right? Who offers me that compatibility, then I could look at that person now and say, well, I don't want to do that anymore. And I think that's why it's so important to start from a base that's healthy. So then that way, I want to find someone who also is in that healthy base. And that ties into the emotional comfort piece because when I'm in that healthy base and we both want something that's healthy for us, there's nothing wrong with encouraging or telling each other, hey, maybe don't do that. That's not good for your health, or let's focus on working out this week, or let's try to eat more nutritious, or let's try to take more time, to work on our health and tap into our spirituality. And I think when you have that as your base and when you have the emotional comfort in something that's not going to take you away from your true self or your values or your morals, that's actually what's important. But I often think, depending on the season and the phases of our lives, that emotional comfort doesn't look the same because sometimes, in moments where we've been challenged or we've been hurt, we're looking for a person that's just going to agree with us. We may not want to look for that person who's going to tell us the truth or tell us to change, right? Versus looking for someone who's going to challenge us and push us because that's actually what we need. And those people are actually compatible with us in the long run because that person's actually going to help us achieve a lot of our goals and help us do a lot of the things that we actually need to do in life. All right. How much of long-term dating is just avoiding loneliness? Ooh, this is spicy. I think that one of the hardest things about being in a long-term relationship versus a lot of short relationships that end is that after a while of breaking up or hurting people or you being hurt by people, I think that hopefully people start to learn a lesson about the fact that things don't last forever. And if you're not with the right person, it's not going to work out. And I think, unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they date the same person or the wrong person for a really long time. And, I've seen this. People say, oh, I'm going to stay around for the kids, or I'm going to stay around for different things. It's not just doing this to say to people that I'm in a relationship or I tried or I did this, but it's to be in a relationship with a purpose to say that I'm in a relationship with this person and this is what we're trying to build. This is what our goals are. This is why we're together. This is our purpose. And again, I think people that are scared of loneliness are running away from their purpose. Because if you know what your purpose is, then you're not scared to go through that phase where, yeah, maybe you will be alone. But again, you're going to work on yourself. And then that's going to open the door for the right person to come into your life. Okay. Would most people leave sooner if they had better options? I think there's moments where maybe you're in a relationship where the person you're with is holding you back from your potential and there actually is something better for you out there. And then I think sometimes there's the opposite where you think that there's something better out there for you, but the relationship and the person that you do have is such a blessing and they're such a good person that when you let them go and you end up, looking for somebody else, you realize that, you know, how good you had it in your previous situation. I think the important thing is to use discernment and to kind of look at your situation and understand again what your goals are, what your purpose is, because I think when you know what you want and what you're working towards, then it's easier to see if your relationship is aligning with that. But I think when you don't know what you want or you don't know what you're working towards, how do you judge if this relationship is actually holding me back from my purpose because you don't know what your purpose is? And so, again, I think the the focus isn't whether or not you should leave or if there's something better, but you need to know what it is you want and what it is that you want to accomplish in your life and in your relationship. And then also have that conversation with your partner and kind of say, this is what I want, this is what I'm working towards, and is this what you're working towards? And I think if the person is saying, yeah, this is what I want to do, and they're doing the work with you, then you'll clearly see that there's not a better option for you because you found a person who's willing to work with you and get the work done. Whereas, if you have that conversation and that person's saying no, or they're saying yes, but they're not doing the work, then I think that gives you some insight to kind of see, okay, maybe I need to reassess or reevaluate, if this relationship's going to work. And don't get me wrong, I think it's hard because there's not a time frame of, if they don't do it in this time frame, then, they're the wrong person for me. And this person came along, they did it in a week. That's how I know. I don't think it's like that, but I think you should be able to judge a person by their character and their effort. And I think you're going to know when a person wants to change and they want to do better and they are putting in that work. And I think as long as they're willing to put in that work and be transparent and take accountability, I think that you're in a good place because I think with those tools and with that positive mindset and good attitude, I think that a lot of the difficulties or hardships that you're going through, eventually you'll get through them. But I think in situations where communication is completely broken down, maybe it is time to think about going in a different direction. And I think honestly, that's why often people are told like, don't don't get in relations with people that are unequally yoked and find a person that believes in God. Because at the end of the day, if I have these strong moral beliefs and I believe in God and you don't, and you want to go do all these things and the relationship isn't working out, then I can't blame anyone but myself, but at the same time, I can't keep putting that expectation on that person to be somebody that they're not. That's not who you are. I can't get mad at you for being something that you don't want to be. What I need to do is I need to say, okay, well, this is what I want to be. This is what I'm trying to pursue. And I need a person who also wants to pursue that with me. And if you can't be that person for me and you're not working towards that with me, then I need to find that. All right. If you knew your partner would never change, would you still stay? This is a hard one because I think that change is really a big part of who I am. And I think if I was in a relationship with somebody who never changes, I think that would be very hard for me. I think there are parts of people that don't necessarily ever change. I think there's certain things that are just ingrained in who people are. But I think what you can change or how I would stay and work with it is I would learn to change things about myself or my mindset at least to say, if I know that, arguments bother me and, my wife is a person who loves to argue. I have to learn to have a different tone. I have to learn to not engage in those heated moments. Or if I know that my partner's a person who has a drug addiction or different things, I have to know to set those boundaries. And I think it's important to figure out what those boundaries are for you and what you're willing to endure. And then set that boundary and kind of say, okay, this is my line. And when I hit that threshold or I hit this place, if I'm unsafe or if there's a very serious negative effect to my life, then I need to separate myself from this person and focus on me. But I think if it's more petty, medial things like socks on the floor or, hairstyles or clothing, those things I think you got to treat differently. But I think when it comes to serious things that can affect you, your family, your children, different things, I think that's where you have to set your boundaries, and I don't necessarily think you have to leave them per se, but I think, taking some time to separate yourself and to, give that person time to do the work. And if you choose or you feel like you want to go back into that situation, I'm always for giving people second chances and working things out. But I'm also very aware that working things out isn't possible in every situation with people. So you got to be smart and you got to be wise. But thank you guys so much for tuning in for my marriage talk. And we're going to have more talks like this. And I hope to hear from you guys soon. Peace out.